Immoral scientific experiments. What science experiment would you conduct if there were no questions, no money, and no moral standards? The Gilligan's Island experiment. 100 people of very different backgrounds, wealth, and characters are stranded on a distant island after a shipwreck. Let's see what kind of civilization develops out of all this. Then it will be necessary to repeat the experiment 50 more times to compare the results with each other. There was a book about something like that. In general, there are a number of studies on this subject. Try to Google it. It will be interesting, I think. Shipwreck Society or something like that. I want to send someone into space without a spacesuit. I've read about everything that can happen there, but now I just want to check it out on video. I would put 5 mentally normal and healthy people in the same institution with 5 psychopaths, with crazy killers. They would have group classes in pairs of 2 people from each group, and these classes would be of 2 types, moral and immoral. I'd then summarize how much of an impact these classes have on the people in both groups. Modified. It won't be a prison. The subjects would be regular volunteers. Prison is a completely different case, and the results of the experiment at Stanford Prison were completely different. This group of 2 would participate in the murder, but the psychopaths would not be allowed to kill their partner or anyone else in the experiment. I'd hold an Olympics in which every athlete would be doped up to the hilt. I think the current opportunities and standards would increase dramatically after such a thing. I would see if the monkey tribe could dominate the rest they were trained to make and use weapons and other primitive technologies. I also wonder if they could use all their newfound knowledge and begin to expand their empire. We humans already know an interesting thing about chimpanzees. They don't teach each other. They are often just watching. A monkey watches another monkey do something. People teach each other. When we are young, we initially have trust in other people, so we believe that what we are taught is true. Adults teach each other, thus forming mutually beneficial relationships. This is what has given us a huge advantage in the development of material cultures such as stone tools, which are made according to similar patterns by different groups of people. We've been learning a lot more from each other than other monkey-like creatures since we were kids. If a monkey learns to make a spear, it would not go back to its tribe and actively teach others how to make a spear for the benefit of the pack. But those who see a chimp make a spear would make their own by observing the process. I've always wanted to try breeding a winter blooming rose. Moral standards would not be shaken, but such a gigantic number of roses in a greenhouse, 10 years of selective breeding would likely require an astronomical sum. This is one of the most interesting responses of this thread, while not being cruel or incomprehensible. This experiment seems so simple and achievable, but I fully understand that it takes, as you said, an unreal amount of money and work to achieve the desired result. I would train the gorillas in a gym, see how much they could progress. That being said, I'd put a shitload of steroids in them. Then I'd drug this whole army of beasts cocaine and let them go to an empty mall. I want to see which stores they like and which ones they don't. Well, it's kind of all bullshit for science sake. I've always wanted to see athletes from different sports fight each other. Would they fight differently at all? UFC fighters would, by strolling, destroy other athletes one by one, until the biathlon guy pulls out his gun and starts shooting. How long the decapitated head remains conscious? All we have now are all sorts of stories, which can often be exaggerated. I always wanted an unambiguous answer, but, moral standards. Already did the experiment, about 7 to 10 seconds, so start planning what your last words are going to be. I already invented for myself. Wow, that's mind-blowing. Bro, you're not getting any lungs. Just change the mode of the industrial vacuum cleaner from suction to blowing and insert it into the man's trachea. It speaks very loudly, perhaps even louder than the sound of a vacuum cleaner's motor, and you won't have to stop to catch your breath. I'd like to see what a community of children on their own would do if they were without adults from birth. Of course, it would be necessary to raise them while they are babies, but then how would they develop the language, moral, mythology, culture, and over the years, how would they cope with growing up without the role models of the adults around them? Although unethical, I think such an experiment would answer many questions of sociology, psychology, anthropology, and philosophy. It's like watching the beginning of human society from scratch, without outside influence. Modified. Yes, I have read Lord of the Flies, but it is a work of fiction. Near-death experiences and what people see. Well, basically, I like to kill a bunch of people and then bring them back to life. That said, I'm sure many of them won't be coming back. Watch OA. It's an interesting series from Netflix about near-death experiences. I would use genetics to breed a dozen children with fucking powerful abilities. They would run fast and jump wildly high, then organize the Olympics for athletes with super powerful abilities and find out what a person is really capable of. This is so different from what I just read about breeding winter roses. Cloning dinosaurs. Are there any other options? Humanity has a couple of movies that clearly show that cloning dinosaurs is a bad idea for our planet. So you think we should go to the moon or Mars? Oh man, I like that question. There are a ton of geoengineering experiments I'd like to do if they weren't both A, illegal, B, insanely expensive, C, likely to lead to death and destruction. Iron fertilizer. Essentially dumping huge amounts of iron dust into the ocean would result in algae blooms, which are supposed to absorb heaps of carbon and help mitigate the effects of global warming. Seeding clouds, space mirrors, dropping an atomic bomb into a volcano. You know, the usual stuff. Human genetic modifications. Now, there are people who agree to this at a conscious age. However, to do this with an embryo or to see with the DNA of the parents, what we can do to improve the human being would be amazing. Improved intelligence, improved memory of physical characteristics, added gills for swimming underwater, altered vision, ability to see the full spectrum of light, improved hearing to the ability to hear the full spectrum of sound, immunity to all diseases and harmful bacteria, ability to eat almost anything to satisfy hunger. I would like to clone some little Hitlers and see how they grow under different conditions. Put them, for example, in the following conditions. A loving family that makes you sick how perfect it is. Jewish family. A family of artists in which his talent is encouraged. An abusive family, similar to the one he grew up in. Family of scientists. And finally, the most ethically corrupt environment. Family of politicians. And it would take a bunch more cloned baby Hitlers for us to finally decide what percentage of people would have killed little Hitler. Teach your child to misuse words for everything around them and see how long he takes to adapt. There seem to be quite a few people who do this to children for no reason. Seriously, don't do that for anything. It's horrible. This post is based on the concept of moral rejection. Modified. Several people have pointed out that this is the same as learning a second language, and I want to explain why it is not. When you learn a second language, you assign a new word, which has no previous meaning, to a concept you already know. So you know what an apple is, and you say yabloko over it when you learn words in Russian. But in the case we're talking about, you're not learning a new word, but you're taking a word that is already assigned to another concept and trying to apply it somewhere else, while forgetting the original connection. Our brains are not very good at severing nerve connections. So you start thinking you bite the car, apple, get on the roof, car, and drive to the blue, to work. It is very difficult because our brain automatically tries to learn something new, but it does not have a fine-tuned mechanism for forgetting. Judging from the comments, it seems that some have encountered a similar situation in one word, and have had a very difficult time readjusting. I tend to think that such a thing would really break a person mentally. The experiment is considered optional. I read a story about a man teaching his daughter to do that, as she accidentally killed him because when she was asked if anyone was in the burning house he was trapped in, she said no, implying yes. I organized two groups of children. One, only boys, the other, only girls. Send them to two different islands. Let's deliver food to them with robots and give them no information on anything regarding gender, sexuality, race, language, and so on, and see how they develop. Also, never mention the opposite sex and racial diversity. Such an experiment would answer so many questions concerning psychology. Is sexual orientation a product of nature or upbringing? Are people born with innate gender roles? Are humans by nature prone to tribalism and/or xenophobia? Modified. Several people here confuse attraction to the opposite sex with the desire to procreate. Some gays want to have children too. Growing up without ever encountering the opposite sex. Interesting thought. If we are biologically determined to seek out the opposite sex to reproduce, but we don't know that the opposite sex even exists, what then? How children would grow up with occasional microdoses of LSD. Or how a child would grow up if his mother used LSD, MDMA, psychoactive substances while pregnant. I would have a serial killer contest. The first person who successfully abducts and kills 50 people will receive $10 million a year after the last murder, if they are not caught by the authorities and can prove the murders. How many people would agree to take part in this? How many victims would there be in the end? Can I just say that if they make a show or series on the subject, I'm definitely going to watch it. Raising a child among monkeys, for the most part, is to see if something like Tarzan turns out and if humans can fully communicate with monkeys. In fact, there have been many cases where wild children have been raised with animals, most often dogs, since they are most related to humans. But I think that was also the case with monkeys. Google feral children and you can find many articles and stories on the subject. Human brain transplants to animals and vice versa. I think our psychology is too different for such a specific operation. Maybe we should start with brain transplants between people first. Let's change it and see if it works or not. Yes, but imagine a dolphin in a human body trying to figure out how to move at all and what to do. Actually, I thought a lot about it. I would arrange for two people to have exactly the same conditions throughout their lives. Now, I'm not just talking about similar scenarios, but everything from the temperature inside the womb to the people they interact with on a daily basis to the force with which the wind blows as they talk. And I would see if they are the same. From a living example, we would determine whether a person is born with certain characteristics, or whether he develops them through little things all his life, butterfly effect. Of course, such an experiment is impossible, even with an infinite amount of money, but it would be great to make it happen. Raise a child without punishing or rewarding him. Just let him do whatever he wants, and then let's see what happens to their behavior when they get older. They would still receive punishments and rewards from their environment. Such an experiment would only answer the question of the environment in which the child was born, not destroy the genetic aspect inherent in the behavior. Thank you very much for watching. In the comments below the video, you can write what science experiment you would conduct if money and moral standards were not an issue. Plus, I suggest watching the video. I am a Russian cop in the United States to answer questions.